Long distance relationships feel good at first. FaceTime calls at midnight, and of course that constant ache to be together. But over time, that ache turns into anxiety, and the distance starts to feel like a countdown. Here's the truth about long distance relationships that nobody tells you. Long distance isn't the problem, uncertainty is. You can survive the miles, not the lack of vision. What I mean by that is there's no timeline. There's no end game. And there's not really much of a plan to build an actual relationship. You guys are just stuck in the fantasy. You're not building a relationship, you're just prolonging a fantasy. Oftentimes what happens is we meet people around the world in various ways, whether it's Instagram or whether it's a random, chat roulette thing. What happens is we tend to idolize them from afar because it's so easy to take our projections, what we want to see in another person, and project those qualities onto this person like a mask that we're forcing them to wear. That's why the term is called fantasy projection, because it's not actually about that person. We're not actually in love with them. We don't actually want them. We just want the fantasy that we've projected onto them. That's what we call a fantasy bond. There's no real emotional stability or grounding there. And by the way, this is on par with what a rebound is after a relationship or after a breakup, because it's the same type of fantasy projection that your ex is projecting onto their new man that makes them stay in that relationship because they view them as this savior, as this perfect person that can do no wrong. But of course, a few weeks, a few months later, and the fantasy crumbles. This exact same dynamic plays out in long distance relationships because that distance allows that fantasy to grow. And a lot of times where the anxiety comes from being in a long distance relationship is when one person tries to actually make plans and the other person backs away from them. The other person cancels on them. The other person starts to get a little bit skittish and you wonder, where's this coming from? Doesn't this person actually like me? And the truth is, maybe, right? Maybe. But what they're really protecting is their version of you that they have in their head, because the second that you meet, it becomes real and the fantasy has to die in order for the real to take its place. And the honest and simple truth is most long distance relationships cannot handle the falling of the fantasy and the rising of the real. Sounds like a movie title or something. TM that, all right, I own this. I own this. But I do understand it. Having been in a couple long distance relationships myself, you feel more connected to that person over thousands of miles than you do with the people sitting right next to you. But the problem is, it's not building real world intimacy, which leads me back again to the point that most of this is just fantasy projection. And the more real you become in that relationship, the more real the entire relationship becomes, right? The more you actually start to fall in love, not just say it, you know what I mean by actually falling in love. The more anxiety, the more risky this whole thing starts to feel. And you know that there has to be some sort of a future plan or else you're not gonna make it because the whole thing just stays online. And some people will do this for literally years because they don't know how to build anything in person in real life. And that skill is something that you just learn. Yes, you're gonna screw up. Yes, you're gonna blow up relationships, but you've got to learn how to do these things because that's what you actually want in life. You don't want a relationship with a computer screen. You want it with somebody who's right there with you. And what I've seen from a lot of guys is that they have such low self-esteem, they don't think that they're gonna meet anyone in their city or, a city right next to them. And they think that this long distance relationship is truly their only shot at lasting happiness. I think logically, they know it's not, but their insecurities are telling them that they really do need to hold on to this person because they're so special and because they're giving you attention and because you don't really get a lot of attention from the females in your area. And that's what makes this connection actually special. It feels like somebody is actually listening to you for once. You're actually having a conversation. You're actually being able to build some type of a bond with this person. And hey, even if it is a fantasy bond, my God, isn't it better than nothing? And I gotta be honest, it's like kind of, you don't wanna sit at home literally by yourself and do literally nothing. But therein lies the problem, is that you're usually sitting at home doing nothing. The people who fall into these long distance traps usually are the types of people who, they play video games a lot, they watch TV a lot, they don't really have many friends, they don't go out and do things, they don't have a lot of money. Those are the types of guys that fall into these long distance traps. Here's what I want to draw your attention to, okay? Emotionally, I know that you feel close. And I know you expect me to say, well, physically, of course, we're not close. So physically, we can't get intimate with each other. But it goes deeper than that. You understand that when you love somebody, even when you start to love somebody, that they enter your nervous system. They enter the nerves in your spinal column. It's more than just seeing them and getting excited. It's every single time that you see that person's profile pic pop up, every single time you even see that person's name in public, you get that little twinge in your chest. You get that little prick in your heart. All of a sudden, it shakes you a little bit. That person's in your nervous system. And what happens is your body, your nervous system, eventually catches up. And even though you're close to them emotionally, you can't hold them in your nervous system like that without grounding it in something real eventually. Inevitably, one of you will have the to pull back first. Usually it's subtle. They don't reply to you for a few hours. They don't send you a good morning text. They don't initiate a video call when you asked. They come up with these lame excuses like, oh, I'm sorry, I just didn't see this. I've been busy. That's the quiet beginning of detachment. It's not out of spite. It's just out of survival. It's their nervous system catching up with them emotionally by telling them, hey, I need more than this. I am freaking starving for an actual connection, and this thing has either got to connect or it's got to go. And here's the truth of it. The strongest fantasy projection crumbles under the smallest emotional or real grounding bond that they have in real life. That means that they may want you more, but the person that's next to them, even if they're not as attractive, not as successful, they don't have as much money, they're not as funny, they'll go for that person over you because that person's real and you're not. Okay, enough with the doom and gloom. How do you make this long distance thing last? Or what are a few pointers you can give me here? First and foremost, there has got to be a plan to actually close the distance. It doesn't need to come immediately, but there needs to be something that says, hey, I plan on being in your city in such and such amount of months. The trust between you guys needs to be at least surface level. So what I mean by that is they at least trust you to show up as much as they would somebody in real life that they asked out on a date. Because you don't want to fly all the way there or drive all the way there, especially if you're an American, because, you know, we drive everywhere, and have them not meet you. And by the way, if that does happen to you, you need to detach immediately. Don't get angry at them or anything like that, but understand that when this thing got real, they pulled away like that, which means that they were only in love with the fantasy bond. And I know that hurts, but you've got to understand that that dynamic that you had with them wasn't strong enough to survive actual grounding. Next, both people are mature and somewhat independent. So what I mean is, yeah, it's okay if you're still a teenager, you want to meet your girlfriend that lives a few states away or something, you know, I understand this. What I mean by independent is you don't want to rely on the other person's parents, right? You don't want to go meet this person and then they have all these other obligations. Maybe it's to their kids, maybe it's to an elderly parent or something like this. They have to be emotionally available for you. And if they're tied up with all these other things, even if you do meet, they're still not going to be able to ground you emotionally, which is what's required for an actual bond. Lastly, and this is the most important point, so please pay attention. The communication between you two has got to be more than romantic. It's got to be structured and realistic. It's okay if you guys do not talk every single day. It's okay if there's not always a good morning text. It's okay if there are weekends where you're just out with your friends or doing something like that, and the other person is just busy, whatever. They don't blow up at you. Nobody is accusing anybody of anything. There's that emotional grounding that's starting to happen there. It's that trust there that's starting to form when these things happen. Now, I realize that a lot of people cannot be trusted, but if you want a healthy dynamic between you two, then the communication has got to be realistic. And blowing up each other's phones for a couple weeks is not realistic. What that is the fantasy projection taking your emotional strength to prop up and keep up. And you're not gonna be able to keep that up for long. You're gonna become emotionally exhausted, or the other person will, and that's actually why they pull away even though you're long distance, because they just can't keep up this fantasy of who they are or who they're trying to project themselves to be for you. All of that takes emotional energy, and there's no one on this planet who can keep that up for long. Eventually, who the other person actually is going to slip through, and that's a good thing, but in long distance relationships, it's very difficult to maintain it after that mask has fallen. And that mask was that fantasy projection that you had projected onto them. Final thoughts, bro. Long distance is not for the weak, but it's also not for the wishful either. Without vision, meaning a future plan, it fades. Without structure, it collapses. Without trust, it will rot from the inside. So let me leave you with this and I'm done. If there's no plan to meet up in the future, if there's no end game in sight, then you're not building a relationship with this person, you're just prolonging a fantasy, and you won't be able to keep that up for long. Little bro, little sis, you've got this, and I've got you. I'll see you in the next one.